To call Jodie Ounsley multi-talented would be a disservice to her. Idolised as Fury by millions on the BBC's Gladiators series and the first ever deaf person to play rugby for England. Now, as the first women's rugby player on the 𝗕𝗹𝗹 Stick to Rugby podcast, she's a role model to children with special educational needs all over the world.
I started in loads of different sports, so very much like karate, judo, Brazilian jiu-jitsu, athletics, but then I kind of got into deaf sport in athletics from like the age of 8 for a couple of years, and then I went into more like mainstream sport like rugby, and then my career kind of just took off in rugby then.
When playing rugby, most recently for Exeter Chiefs in the PWR, Jodie wore a scrum cap to protect her cochlear implant, which allows her to hear.
There's still a risk, and I'm still very aware that it's my responsibility, but it allows me to play. So.
And was it just is it just like a normal scrum cap, or do you have any modifications to it? Or?
Yeah, so it's a standard scrum cap, but then sort of the early stages I added like extra padding sort of near the implant just to give it an extra bit of impact, but after a few years I took that out and I just had a standard one, and it was fine. But like I said, I'm not always encouraging people to do that. It's obviously very much, I know it's my choice, and then have things in place to make it more safe. So.
And can you just kind of speak a bit about the implant itself and how it works?
Yeah, so a cochlear implant, I think people get mixed up between hearing aids and a cochlear implant, which anyone would. A hearing aid is, it's if you've still got some hearing, it just amplifies sound, whereas with a cochlear implant, you basically have no hearing at all, and then it sends signals straight to your brain and like interprets that as sound. So they are very different. Implants much more complex, but both work in different ways.
What's on the inside that kind of allows that to happen, basically? So
the part you see on my ear, that's just where the batteries are. That's the processor. It's the actual circle part, which is the magnet, and I have a magnet under my skin on my skull. So then that connects straight to my brain, basically. And then you can get gadgets like the microphone, and that sort of, if someone's speaking into it, it then goes straight to my implant, which is quite cool, I suppose.
How does it feel to be kind of a role model for children with hearing problems, or just saying children in general?
It means a lot to me. I feel really passionate about it, but again, like when people say all these amazing things to me, it's quite baffling. Sometimes I'm like, it's quite hard to believe it. So for myself, it's taking it all in, and yeah, I take a lot of pride in that.
And what would your advice be to parents who've got kids with hearing difficulties?
I think for parents, obviously parents want the best for their kids and might sometimes keep them wrapped up in a bubble a little bit, which I can understand that, but I think what I really respect about my parents is that they support me like nothing else, but they also push me to do things that terrify me, basically. And by doing that, I've been so glad I've done it, and then my confidence has grown. So I'd say support them, but also encourage them to push themselves. So.
And how important do you think sessions for SEND kids are to get them playing sports? How important do you think they are?
I think that's really important, because it's one thing, even young kids and girls staying in sport growing up, never mind, if you're deaf, it is quite isolating, and then being able to mingle and sort of mix into a team sport, for example, it can be really challenging. So if there was certain sessions that had a couple of deaf kids and people knew BSL, or even just put things in place to make it a bit easier to understand, that could make a huge difference. And then you never know, they might have the confidence to keep playing and then go on different directions in sport.
And do you think kind of professional sports clubs are doing enough to support SEND kids?
I think there's a lot to be done, but for example, my club, in terms of, they might have not had something in the first place, but by me joining that team and being very open of like, this is what I struggle with, this is my disability, this is how you can support me, all my teammates and coaches have been amazing to accommodate that. So I think it sort of goes, it's little things, and then little steps go into big movements. So I think we just got to start somewhere, and then things hopefully just improve.
And if you could kind of change one thing about the current accessibility to sessions for same kids, what would be the improvement that you'd like to see?
I'd probably just say even just the openness from whether it's coaches or managers because I think there's still quite a big stigma of people being nervous, which is fine because people might have never come across a person with a disability. I think it's more being open to it, not being afraid to talk about it, and so much comes from that. If people have a better understanding of what they're having to support and deal with, then so much can kind of come from that, which I've seen myself from my own experience.
However, her fame and success as an elite athlete is not the end goal for Ounsley. All that matters to her is being a role model to children, and she is now a patron at the Dorset-based 𝗕𝗹𝗵𝗶 Foundation.
They help preschool deaf babies and children with language and rehab before going into school.
Oh, amazing.
Yeah, and they're amazing at supporting parents and so they are really good people. I started speech therapy when I was very young, so I started rehab from 3 months and then carried on, went into speech. But obviously every deaf person's different. Some people might, only use British Sign Language and not talk and want to be very within the deaf community, which is fine. And then there's other people like myself who are kind of more in the mainstream world and do speech therapy. I know a little bits of British Sign Language, but it's not my first language. So I think it's different for everyone and the situation's going to be different in different scenarios. So I think, again, it just goes down to that, being open about it.
And do you think things like BSL should be taught in schools?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, we learn languages in school, which is a big, key tool. Never mind, British Sign Language could be helpful in so many situations with the kids. And it's not just about deaf people. I mean, it would be so useful. For example, if someone's at the other side of the room and instead of screaming and you're like, what's going on, you could literally sign. So I think it would be beneficial in so many different ways, and also including the deaf community as well would be pretty amazing.
And my last question is kind of looking more holistically, how would you like to be remembered?
Oh, good question. I'd probably say for being a good person. Sounds cliche and simple, but I just want to do good in the world, and if people remember me for being a good person and making an impact, that would be pretty cool.
To learn a bit more about the 𝗕𝗹𝗵𝗶 Foundation and how they helped Jodie, I spoke to their chief executive, Julie Hughes.
So the 𝗕𝗹𝗵𝗶 Foundation was founded by parents of a deaf child, and it's a charity that supports deaf children to learn to listen and speak, we support parents to become confident advocates on behalf of their children.
How important is it for the 𝗕𝗹𝗵𝗶 Foundation to have people like Jodie Ounsley, who are role models to the children who come to you?
Jodie is such an inspiration, and all the children here, and interestingly, children here are still quite young, but when I see the 5, 6, 7, 8-year-olds who come back to visit, who came through our program, Jodie's their hero. We've got pictures of her in reception, and they all want to be Jodie. So I think having that person to look up to, having that when things get tough, and saying, if she can do it, I can do it, I think is amazing. So I think we need more role models in all areas. But our young children, actually, initially, they're only, the eldest are 3 and 4 years old. They clock straight away when a young adult comes in with a hearing aid or a cochlear implant. And as soon as they walk into the room, they're like, oh, look, they have the same as me. And I think that's really positive as well, that they're seeing other adults and young adults and older people with hearing aids. And it's not just a young kid thing in their world. There's other people with hearing aids and cochlear implants, and that's all okay. So it is positive all around.
Can you just speak to me about how the cochlear implant actually works? From Jodie speaking about it, it completely kind of blew my mind. But it's like probably one of the most amazing pieces of technology I've ever heard of.
I think cochlear implants are a game changer in the world of deafness, and I see people who wouldn't hear a drum beating in the room with them, and they have their cochlear implant, and they have rehab, because it doesn't just get clicked on and it works. You need years of rehab. But they can, you can whisper their name with no visual cues, and they'll respond. So it is an amazing piece of equipment. And the cochlear implant, basically, sound is acoustic. The way we hear sound is acoustical, and cochlear implant makes acoustical sound into electrical sound. So you have a traditional hearing aid that sits on your ear, and that just collects the sound as it normally would. And then you have a little wire that goes up to a disc. I don't know if you saw that on Jodie. Did she show you her cochlear implant?
Yeah, like the magnetic disc.
Yeah, the magnetic disc on her head. Inside her head, there's another disc, same magnet, okay? And the sound goes from outside the head to inside the head through that magnet. That's how we're getting inside. And then inside her head on that magnet, there's a little wire that gets wrapped around her cochlea. And that's your main nerve for hearing. It's where all the hair cells are for hearing. So, and that's what's not working if you have a sensory neural hearing loss. So that wire takes the place of those hair cells, and it stimulates then the auditory nerve, which then takes the sound to the brain. So you've got sound coming in that's acoustical, jumping inside the head on a magnet, going through the wire, becoming electrical, stimulating the auditory nerve, and then going to the brain.
And my last question for you is, how would you like to be remembered?
How would I like to be remembered? Gosh, that's a tough question. I would like to be remembered as someone who cares and someone who tries really hard to make a difference because I care, and I hope I have made a difference. And I'd like the legacy of the Elizabeth Foundation is not my legacy. The legacy of the Elizabeth Foundation is our founder's legacy, Elizabeth's parents. And I would like to think that I made a significant contribution to their legacy, and I would like it to live on much longer after me.
Whilst Jodie Ounsley continues to dominate the Gladiators arena, she shows children with special educational needs that their disabilities do not define them.